Clay Walker had not spoken to another soul in 3 days. The wind was the only thing that ever answered back, and even it spoke in whispers through the dry fences and cracked barn walls. The ranch sat 30 miles from the nearest town and 10 from the nearest road, just the way he liked it. Long dirt drive, quiet fields, tired soil, but his soil. And when the sun came up, he fed the horses, checked the well, moved the cattle if they had not wandered too far, and fixed what needed fixing, which was everything, and yet somehow nothing, because the silence was both a wound and a comfort. He lived that way for years, long, slow, dusty years, after his father passed, after his younger brother left, after the one woman who ever said she loved him got tired of waiting for him to become someone who knew how to love back. He did not blame her. Some people are made for front porches and dinner tables and children's laughter. Clay was not, or at least that was what he believed, until one dry evening in late October, as a storm rolled over the ridgeline and the sky turned the color of ash, he heard a knock at the front door. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't soft either. It was the kind of knock that says, "Please answer before I fall apart." And when he opened it, he saw 4 women standing there, soaked from the rain, standing shoulder to shoulder, not looking like they were lost, but looking like they had run out of places to run. The tallest one stepped forward and said her name was June. The one holding a baby in a blue blanket said she was Lena. The one with a leather backpack full of tools said she was Briar. And the last one didn't speak, just stared like she had already seen too much of the world to explain any of it. And her name, he would learn later, was Rachel. And Clay looked at them, then at the rain, then at the sky, then back at them, and said quietly, "Come in, no questions, just warmth. Just fire in the hearth, and hot coffee in chipped mugs, and soup that wasn't meant for guests but would do." And they sat there, steaming, drying, breathing like they had not breathed in days, and he did not ask where they came from or why they were there. Not then, not that night. He just gave them beds, clean sheets, quiet, and safety. The next morning the ranch felt different, not noisy or not crowded, but full, the kind of full that makes the walls feel stronger, and the air warmer. And over the next days the women stayed and didn't leave, and Clay did not ask them to, because something in the way they worked, in the way they moved, in the way they watched the horizon said they were used to being told to leave and were hoping someone finally would. Lena helped in the kitchen, humming softly while her baby napped. June read to Clay's old dog, who laid her head on June's lap like she had always belonged there. Briar found the busted generator out back and fixed it before breakfast, and Rachel fed the horses. Like she had known their names all her life, they became part of the land, part of the routine, and slowly part of Clay's life. They filled the porch with new chairs and hung washed clothes like banners of survival. They taught each other how to mend not just clothes but hearts, and Clay watched it all quietly, sometimes from the barn window, sometimes from the fence line, wondering how 4 strangers could make something feel like home again. And when he finally asked June late one evening why they had come, all she said was, "We needed somewhere, the world couldn't find us." And he nodded, because he understood more than he wanted to say. Weeks passed, and the weather turned cold, and they stayed longer and longer, until it no longer felt like staying, it felt like building. Briar made a workshop out of the shed and started fixing broken radios from town, selling them for just enough to keep the lights on. Lena started painting again with colors so bright they made Clay's chest ache like the sunrise used to, and Rachel began writing letters to a sister she hadn't seen in years, never sending them, just leaving them in a box near the fireplace. And June started keeping a journal of everything they planted, grew, made, and survived, and she read it aloud some nights when they all sat around the fire wrapped in old blankets and new hope. And slowly Clay changed too. He stopped sleeping with the door locked, stopped keeping the rifle beside the bed, stopped speaking only when spoken to, and started remembering what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. And one morning he woke before the sun and found Lena on the porch holding her baby close and crying into the wind, and he sat beside her, not asking, not talking, just being there. And she whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to raise her alone." And he said, "You're not alone anymore." And she believed him, because he meant it. And one night weeks later, a truck pulled up on the road, headlights cutting through the dark, and Clay stepped outside, shotgun in hand, not out of fear but instinct. And the man who stepped out asked for Briar, and when Briar came to the porch, her hands shaking, she said, "Tell him to leave." And Clay did without raising his voice, and the man left, and Briar fell apart right there on the steps, and Clay held her like a father would, like a brother, like a wall that would never fall. And that night they all sat closer together, and nothing needed to be said, because silence sometimes says the most. And the ranch became more than a place, it became a haven, a truth, a last chance. And months turned to years, and Clay started smiling more, laughing. Even Lena's baby grew into a wild thing with clay on her shoes and hay in her hair. And June got a letter from her son one day. and she cried and sent one back, and Rachel finally sent one of her letters and it came back with a reply, and Briar started teaching girls from town how to build things, how to fix things, how to stand up. And one spring morning Clay found a box on the porch with a note from his brother asking for help for his own daughter who had nowhere else to go, and Clay opened that door too and let her in without question, because once a man learns what home really means he never lets it go again. And years later, when folks asked how that old ranch came back to life, Clay would tell them it wasn't the land or the weather or the cattle, it was for women, one night, one knock, one chance to choose love over fear. And when you do that, when you open the door and let the world in, you don't just survive, you come alive. The girl who came off the back of the pickup was named Hope, and Clay thought no name had ever been more right or more painful all at once. She was 15, thin, quiet, her eyes guarded, and her fists always half clenched like she was ready to fight anyone who stepped too close. She didn't speak much the first few weeks, only said what she had to, and only to Lena's daughter, who was now 6 and wild and full of questions that no one else ever asked. And slowly Hope started answering them, and then asking some of her own. And by the time summer warmed the hills, Hope was feeding the goats, brushing the horses, drawing in the dirt with a stick as Lena's daughter told her stories made up from scratch. Clay watched it all and said nothing at first, because he knew some people need time to know they're safe. But one night when Hope couldn't sleep and he found her sitting on the steps under the stars, staring up like she expected the sky to fall, he sat down beside her, not close, not far, just enough, and said, "You don't have to be anything you're not." And she said, "I don't know what I am." And he said, "Then we'll figure it out together." And she didn't answer, but she didn't get up either. And from that night on she stayed a little closer to the porch, a little longer at the table, a little more open to the life that was slowly growing around her. And the women were changing too. June had started taking trips into town, helping at the library, organizing classes for women with no place to go, and her journals were filling up faster than the shelves. Briar took a job at a local garage, not because she needed the money but because she wanted to teach, and soon had 3 girls from the reservation working under her, learning how to rebuild engines and stand their ground. And Lena's paintings were now being sold at a gallery 2 towns over, and she used the money not for herself but for the ranch, for the garden, for Hope's school books. And Rachel, who once never raised her voice, was now the lead hand for the horses, training rescues, bringing in animals no one else wanted, and healing them the way she had learned to heal herself. And Clay found himself somewhere in the middle of it all, the center of a life he never thought he'd have. One morning after a long rainstorm, he stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over a field that used to be empty and was now full of people, animals, work, and warmth. And Lena stepped up beside him, said, "It feels like home," and he nodded, because it did. More than anything else, it felt like belonging. And sometime later, weeks, maybe months, the idea of marriage came up, not like a question, not like a grand moment, but like a seed planted in a conversation. Rachel asked him what he believed in, and he said, "I believe in you all, and I believe in this." And she smiled and said, "Sometimes belief is enough. Sometimes it's everything." And the next morning, Clay carved a small wooden ring from the oak tree that stood in the center of the ranch, and he gave it not to one but to all 4 women, one by one, and said, "I don't know what this makes us, but I know it makes us family." And they all said yes, not because it was perfect but because it was true. And the town learned not to ask questions and just called it the Walker Ranch. And everyone knew if you needed a place to start over, if you needed work or silence or healing, you could find it there, as long as you were willing to show up, be honest, and feed the horses. And years passed, and the children grew. Hope went to college, then came back to teach, and Lena's daughter became a painter like her mother, and Rachel started writing books, and June's son returned and helped run the greenhouse, and Briar opened a trade school on the edge of the ranch, with Clay still waking before the sun, still feeding the animals, still watching it all unfold like a story he never asked for but was grateful to live. And when he finally grew too old to ride the fence line, he sat on the porch with his dog at his feet, and the women around him, and the children now grown, and he smiled at the life he had built, not with plans or money or ambition, but with a door that opened and a heart that stayed open. And when he closed his eyes for the last time, the wind moved through the fields like it was saying thank you, and the people he left behind carried on, not in mourning but in legacy, because the ranch was never about the man who owned it, but the lives it had saved, the love it had made, and the way it taught everyone who came through its gates that family is not always blood, and home is not always where you started, it's where you choose to stay and grow and love, no matter what came before.